The lunch rush was dying down at Chez Michel, one of Boston's most celebrated fine dining establishments. Soft jazz played over the speakers as patrons enjoyed their meals beneath crystal chandeliers. Executive chef Michel Dubois had transformed this historic brownstone into a culinary landmark, earning 2 Michelin stars and countless accolades. James Chen, a third-year server at Chez Michel, moved effortlessly between tables, refilling water, delivering carefully plated dishes, and attending to every need with perfect timing. His attention to detail had earned him a reputation among regular patrons, who often requested his section. "Another beautiful presentation, James," remarked an elderly woman as he set down her coque au vin. "You always make everything so special." James smiled warmly. "It's my pleasure, Mrs. Harrington. Chef Michel outdid himself with your favorite today." The peaceful rhythm of the restaurant shattered as the front door swung open. 4 people, 3 men and 1 woman, strutted in, laughing loudly. Despite the restaurant's formal atmosphere, they wore casual clothes, golf shirts with popped collars, designer sunglasses perched on heads, and an air of entitlement that seemed to announce their arrival before they'd said a word. "Hey, anybody working here?" bellowed the tallest man, scanning the restaurant with obvious disdain. "We need a table. Now." The maitre d' approached with a practiced smile. "Good afternoon. Do you have a reservation?" "Do we look like we need one?" snorted one of the men, adjusting his Rolex. "We're from New York. We don't wait for tables." James watched as the maitre d' politely explained their reservation policy. The group grew increasingly agitated until a corner table opened up. As James was the only server with space in his section, the maitre d' directed him to take the table with an apologetic glance. "Good afternoon," James said, approaching with menus. "Welcome to Chez Michel. My name is James, and I'll be taking care of you today." "What kind of accent is that? Minnesota or something?" the woman asked, not looking up from her phone. "I grew up here in Boston, ma'am," James replied evenly. The tall man snickered. "Listen to him. Ma'am this and sir that. What's with all the politeness? You scared of real customers or something?" James maintained his professional composure. "Our wine list, if you'd like to see our selections." He placed the leather-bound menu on the table. "Bring us 4 glasses of your most expensive champagne," the Rolex man demanded, barely glancing at the menu. "And don't try to cheap out on us. We know the difference." James nodded. "Of course, sir." As he turned to leave, the tall man called after him. "Hey, Boston, make it snappy. We've got places to be." In the service area, James input the order while Chef Michel approached. "Everything okay with the new table?" "They're challenging," James admitted, "but nothing I can't handle." When James returned with the champagne, the New Yorkers were comparing Boston unfavorably to their hometown. "Look at this place," the woman sneered as James carefully poured the Dom Perignon. "It's trying so hard to be elegant." "A smaller glass for me," the third man finally spoke, covering his glass partially. When James adjusted accordingly, the man, scoffed. "Too much. Are you seriously this incompetent? I wanted exactly half." Several nearby diners glanced over, noticing the rising volume from the table. "My apologies, sir," James said, maintaining his calm. "Would you like to order any appetizers today?" "What's good here?" "Actually, never mind. You probably can't afford to eat at your own restaurant," the Rolex man laughed. "Give us one of everything from the appetizer menu. We'll send back what we don't like." An older couple at a nearby table exchanged uncomfortable glances. The husband whispered something to his wife, who shook her head disapprovingly. When James brought the first round of appetizers, describing each dish with precise detail, the woman cut him off. Yeah, we don't need the Wikipedia entry. Just drop the food and go." The tall man picked up a delicate amuse-bouche and frowned. "This is it? This tiny thing?" He popped it in his mouth, talking while chewing. In New York, our appetizers don't require a microscope. As James attended to his other tables, he could hear the New Yorker's commentary growing louder, making jokes at his expense. Do you think he makes minimum wage, or do they pay in lobster shells around here? The Rolex man said, loud enough for James to hear across the dining room. From her corner table, a woman with dark-rimmed glasses looked up from her book. She took a slow sip of her red wine, her gaze narrowing as she observed the scene unfolding. For a moment, her eyes met James, and he could have sworn she gave him a subtle nod. The tall man flagged James. Down again. Hey, Jeeves, do they even pay you real money here, or just whatever falls between the couch cushions? The main courses arrived, each plate a masterpiece of culinary artistry. James presented them with the same care and attention. He showed to every guest, despite the increasingly hostile atmosphere at the table. The chef recommends enjoying the seared scallops immediately for the optimal texture contrast, James explained, placing the dish before the woman. I ordered this medium well, she complained, poking at a perfectly seared scallop. Scallops aren't typically, James began. Are you arguing with me? She snapped. Take it back. I want it cooked properly. James nodded politely. Of course. I'll speak with the chef immediately. In the kitchen, Chef Michel sighed heavily when James explained the situation. The scallops are perfect. Cooking them more will ruin them. I know, James said, but they're becoming difficult. Chef Michel reluctantly overcooked a fresh set of scallops, and James returned to the table. Finally, the woman said, but after one bite, she pushed the plate away. These are rubbery now. I'm not paying for this garbage. The third man, who had been quieter until now, sampled his perfectly prepared duck confit and grimaced. This is trash. What kind of second rate operation are you running here? He looked around at other diners. Don't let the fancy plates fool you, folks. This place is a joke. Several patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A young couple whispered to each other, the woman discreetly aiming her phone toward the New Yorker's table. Sir, I apologize if the dish isn't to your liking, James said. I'd be happy to bring you something else. Oh, he apologizes, mocked the Rolex man, imitating James's accent. So proper, so fake. He stood up suddenly, towering over James. Listen, pal, we're from New York City. We eat at places that would make this dump look like a fast food joint. You think your prissy attitude impresses us? James felt a flush of heat rise to his face but kept his voice steady. I understand, sir. What can I do to improve your experience today? For starters, you can stop with the sir garbage, the tall man joined in, rising slightly from his seat, and maybe get a real job where you don't have to bow and scrape to your betters. The restaurant had grown quieter now. Many conversations halted as attention turned to the escalating scene. The maitre d' hovered nearby, uncertain whether to intervene. I've eaten half of this, the third man declared, pushing his mostly empty plate toward James, and I'm not paying for it. Take it off the bill. James felt his hands trembling slightly as he collected the plate. I'll speak with the manager about adjusting your bill. From across the room, the woman with dark-rimmed glasses set down her glass of wine. She straightened in her seat, adjusted her blazer, and reached slowly for her leather portfolio. Her eyes never left the unfolding scene as she removed her phone and placed it discreetly on the table. The camera lens aimed directly at the New Yorkers. The woman with dark-rimmed glasses, Diana Morgan, senior partner at Morgan & Freeman, one of Boston's most prestigious law firms, tapped the record button on her phone. 20 years of representing clients in workplace harassment cases had taught her to recognize actionable behavior when she saw it. What had begun as a quiet lunch to review case files had become something entirely different. Diana caught James's eye as he passed her table and gave him a reassuring nod. He acknowledged her with the briefest glance, uncertainty mingling with gratitude in his expression. We're just getting started with your crappy service, the tall man announced, draining his third glass of champagne. The group had already finished. 2 bottles worth nearly $1,000. Maybe in Boston this is considered high class, but where we come from, you'd be fired in a heartbeat. James approached their table again, his professional demeanor remarkably intact despite the abuse. Would you care to see our dessert menu? Oh, look, he's still trying, the woman laughed, nudging Rolex man. Like a wind-up toy that doesn't know when to stop. The third man grabbed James's wrist as he tried to clear a plate. Hey, pretty boy, when I snap my fingers, you jump. Got it? He released James with a small shove that sent him back a step. Diana's jaw tightened. Physical contact. The line had officially been crossed from rude behavior to potential assault. She adjusted her phone for a better angle. I think we're done here, announced the tall man. Bring the check, Boston, and don't expect anything extra. Tips are for service, and whatever this was, doesn't qualify. James nodded, returning moments later with their bill on a small silver tray. Thank you for dining with us today. Di Huam, Rolex man snatched the bill, squinting at it. What's this? You still have the duck on here, and these champagne prices are outrageous. As I mentioned earlier, sir, our Dom Perignon is $490 per bottle, and you ordered 2, James explained, calmly. Well, I'm not paying for this, the man declared, crossing out several items on the bill. He slapped down a credit card. Charge the revised amount. The maitre d' appeared at James's side. Is there a problem with the bill, sir? Yeah, your boy here is trying to rip us off, the Rolex man said. These prices are robbery, and half. The food was inedible, the woman chimed in. And he's been rude and condescending the entire time. Several nearby diners exchanged incredulous glances, a few openly shaking their heads at the audacity of the accusation. Diana Morgan had heard enough. She ended her recording, saving it securely to her cloud storage. Then she picked up her phone again and made a call. Marcus? Diana? Listen, I need you to pull some time from your schedule this afternoon. She paused, listening. No, not the Westfield case. Something just came up. I'm going to need template forms for workplace harassment, hostile environment, and assault. Another pause. Yes, right now. I'll explain when I get back to the office. Diana ended the call and smiled slightly to herself, taking a final sip of her wine. That's more than enough, she murmured, her eyes fixed on the New Yorkers as they continued to berate James. Diana Morgan gathered her belongings and approached the contentious table. Her steps were measured, confident, the walk of someone accustomed to controlling courtrooms and boardrooms alike. She'd worn down CEOs and made corporate legal teams crumble with the same casual authority she now carried across the restaurant floor. Excuse me, she said, her voice pleasant but commanding. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. The tall man looked her up and down dismissively. And who are you supposed to be? Diana smiled, the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. Just a concerned patron. I've been enjoying a lovely meal until it was interrupted by what appears to be a serious situation. Look, lady, the Rolex man interjected. This is between us and the restaurant. Why don't you mind your own business? Normally, I would, Diana replied, setting her portfolio on their table without asking permission. But harassment in public spaces actually concerns all of us. The woman rolled her eyes. Harassment? Please, we're just expressing our dissatisfaction. With terrible service. James stood nearby, his face a careful mask of professionalism, though Diana noticed the slight tremble in his hands as he clutched the silver tray. Interesting perspective, Diana said, opening her portfolio and retrieving a business card. She placed it deliberately on the table. Diana Morgan, senior partner, Morgan and Freeman Law. The New Yorkers exchanged glances, the first flicker of uncertainty crossing their faces. So what? You're a lawyer, the tall man scoffed, though his voice had lost some of its previous swagger. We're paying customers with valid complaints. Diana tapped her finger on their edited bill. Valid complaints don't typically involve refusing to pay for consumed services or physically grabbing staff members. She turned toward James. "Sir, did you give permission to be touched during your service today?" Before James could answer, the third man cut in. "This is ridiculous. We barely touched him." "Barely touched is still touching without consent," Diana replied, her tone hardening. "And in Massachusetts, that constitutes assault and battery when unwanted." The maid, D, had moved closer, listening intently. Other patrons had given up any pretense of not watching. "You trying to threaten us with some lawsuit?" the Rolex man demanded, his face flushing. "Over a restaurant dispute? Good luck with that." Diana's smile widened slightly. "Actually, workplace harassment and creating a hostile environment are quite serious matters in this state. Our labor laws protect service workers from exactly this kind of treatment." She turned to her phone, swiping through several screens. "I have approximately 18 minutes of recorded evidence showing escalating verbal abuse, unwanted physical contact, and what any reasonable person would consider intimidating behavior." The woman's expression shifted from dismissive to concerned. "You've been recording us? That's illegal." "Massachusetts is a one-party consent state for public conversation recording," Diana replied without missing a beat. "And this is, after all, a public establishment." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Funny thing about what you just did here today? And that's called workplace harassment. And I'm feeling generous today." The tall man forced a laugh, but it came out hollow. "This is a joke, right? Some Boston prank you play on New Yorkers?" "I assure you, this is no joke," Diana said, remaining perfectly composed. "Let me explain exactly what's happened here today from a legal perspective." She turned to address James directly. "Sir, with your permission, I'd like to outline the legal violations that have occurred during your service today." James, still processing what was happening, nodded slowly. "Yes, that would be fine." Diana turned back to the New Yorkers. "First, we have verbal harassment, a clear pattern of degrading comments directed at Mr. She paused, glancing at James's name tag. Mr. Chen here, specifically targeting his accent, his profession, and his dignity in a place of employment. The woman glanced at her companions, her earlier bravado evaporating. "We were just joking around. Second," Diana continued as if she hadn't heard, "we have creation of a hostile work environment through persistent intimidation tactics. Third, unwanted physical contact when you grabbed his wrist. Fourth, attempted theft of services by refusing to pay for items consumed." She ticked each violation off on her fingers with the precision of someone who had presented similar lists to juries hundreds of times. "And finally, potential defamation when you falsely claimed he was rude and condescending within earshot of other patrons, potentially damaging his professional reputation." By now, several other diners had their phones out, recording the confrontation. An elderly gentleman at a nearby table nodded approvingly at Diana, while a young couple whispered excitedly to each other. "This is absurd," the Rolex man said, but his voice had lost its confident edge. "You can't sue customers for complaining about service." "Complaining? No," Diana agreed. "But what you've done goes far beyond complaints. And yes, I absolutely can bring civil action against you personally, not as customers, but as individuals who have violated multiple statutes." She turned her phone toward them, showing a paused video of the third man grabbing James's wrist. "I have this, and much more, documented. I also have at least 7 potential witnesses in this dining room. Would you like me to collect their contact information now, or shall we wait for the formal discovery process?" The maitre d' stepped forward. "Ms. Morgan, if I may, we at Chez Michel take the safety and dignity of our staff very seriously. If James wishes to pursue this matter, the restaurant will fully support any legal action." From other tables, there came murmurs of agreement. "I've already alerted my associates to prepare the necessary paperwork," Diana said, checking her watch. "They should be ready by the time I return to my office." The New Yorkers exchanged panicked glances, the realization finally dawning on them that this woman wasn't bluffing. "Wait, you're actually serious about this?" the woman asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Diana smiled that same cold smile. "I've won settlements exceeding 7 figures for less egregious cases than what I've witnessed today." 7 figures? The third man repeated, his face paling. "Over a restaurant dispute?" "No," Diana corrected him. "Over documented workplace harassment, assault, and attempted theft. Massachusetts juries are notoriously sympathetic to service workers subjected to abuse, and with the evidence I've collected, this is what legal professionals call an open and shut case." One of the tourists finally seemed to understand the gravity of their situation. "Wait, is this guy actually serious?" Diana turned to James, her tone softening. "Mr. Chen, I'd like to formally offer my services to represent you in this matter, completely pro bono. No cost to you whatsoever." James blinked, processing the sudden turn of events. "You'd do that for a stranger?" "I've built my career on workplace justice cases," Diana explained, "and what happened here today is textbook harassment. My firm would be honored to represent you." The tall man abruptly pushed back his chair. "This is ridiculous. We're leaving." "You're welcome to leave after settling your bill in full," Diana countered smoothly. "Otherwise, we can add theft of services to the complaint." The Rolex man stared at the bill, then at Diana, then at the other patrons watching the scene unfold. His face had gone from ruddy with arrogance to ashen with realization. "Fine," he muttered, pulling out his wallet and slapping down several $100 bills. "Keep the change." "And perhaps a proper tip for Mr. Chen, considering the extraordinary circumstances," Diana suggested, her tone making it clear this wasn't actually a suggestion. After a moment's hesitation, the Rolex man added 2 more $100 bills to the pile. "We good now?" the woman asked, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. Diana glanced at James. "That depends on Mr. Chen. As the injured party, it's his decision whether to pursue legal action." All eyes turned to James, who stood straighter now, the trembling in his hands gone. For the first time since the New Yorkers had arrived, he felt in control. He began, looking from Diana to the now humbled tourists. "I need to think about it." "A perfectly reasonable response," Diana nodded. "I'll leave my card with you. Take your time deciding." She turned back to the tourists. "Though I should mention that in Massachusetts, the statute of limitations for these offenses gives us plenty of time to proceed." The third man, who had grabbed James's wrist, finally spoke up. "Look, we're sorry, okay? We got carried away. No need to make this a whole legal thing." "An apology is a start," Diana acknowledged, "though it would carry more weight if it were directed to Mr. Chen rather than me." The New Yorkers exchanged glances before the third man turned to James. "I apologize for grabbing you, and for the other stuff." James nodded but said nothing. "I have your names from the credit card receipt," Diana noted casually. "And my associates have likely already begun background research. We'll be in touch should Mr. Chen decide to move forward." The tall man's face drained of color. "Research? What kind of research?" "Standard pre-litigation investigation," Diana explained. "Employment history, public records, social media presence, prior complaints or legal issues, just routine preparation." The woman grabbed her purse. "I think we should go, now." As they stood to leave, Diana added, "One more thing. Should Mr. Chen decide to pursue this case, I'd advise against leaving disparaging online reviews or making statements about this restaurant or its staff. That would only strengthen our claim for damages." The New Yorkers shuffled toward the exit, shoulders slumped, faces burning with humiliation. Before following them out, the tall man paused, looking back at James. "We were just having some fun. I didn't think—" He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Diana watched them leave, then turned to James. "So, Mr. Chen, still feeling like the victim here?" The heavy door closed behind the New Yorkers, leaving the restaurant in a momentary hush before conversations gradually resumed. Several patrons approached James, offering words of support and commendation for his professionalism under pressure. "That was quite something," the maitre d' said, shaking his head in disbelief. "In 15 years, I've never seen anyone put tourists in their place quite like that." Diana returned to her table to collect her belongings. James approached her cautiously, still processing what had transpired. "Miss Morgan," he began, "I don't know how to thank you." Diana waved away his gratitude. "No thanks necessary. People like that count on others staying silent. They needed a reality check." "About your offer," James said, "to represent me. Were you serious?" "Absolutely," Diana confirmed, handing him her business card. "My firm handles cases like this regularly, and yours is particularly strong with the evidence we have." James studied the embossed card. "I've never sued anyone before." "It's not about vengeance," Diana explained. "It's about consequences for unacceptable behavior. These types of people rarely face real repercussions for how they treat service workers." "I'll think about it," James promised, "regardless of what I decide. Thank you for standing up for me." 3 weeks later, Diana sat across from James in her office, reviewing paperwork. "The settlement offer came in this morning," she said, sliding a document across her desk. "They're eager to avoid court." James's eyes widened at the figure. "That's a lot of money." "It is," Diana agreed, "and it comes with a non-disclosure agreement, which means you can't discuss the specifics publicly. However, it doesn't prevent the existence of the settlement from being a matter of public record." "Will they know if I accept?" Diana nodded. "Yes, their attorneys will be notified immediately." James thought for a moment. "What happens to them?" "Nothing criminal," Diana explained. "But civil settlements like this follow people. Future background checks, loan applications, employment screenings, this will appear. And in today's connected world, word travels fast in certain circles." 2 days later, in a trendy New York restaurant, the Rolex man's credit card was declined as he attempted to impress a date. "There must be some mistake," he insisted to the server. "Run it again." The manager approached their table. "I'm sorry, sir. There appears to be an issue with your account. Perhaps another form of payment?" Red-faced, he fumbled for another card, while his date watched uncomfortably. That same evening, the tall man received a call from his investment firm. "We need to discuss a settlement that appeared in your background check," his supervisor said. "The partners have concerns about client-facing roles for employees with certain histories." Meanwhile, in Boston, James Chen hung up his phone, smiling to himself. Chef Michel had just offered him a promotion to head server, citing his exceptional professionalism and the glowing reviews that had poured in from patrons who witnessed his grace under pressure. Later that night, James posted a carefully worded update to his social media. "Excited to announce my promotion at Chez Michel. Special thanks to everyone who supported me through challenging times. Remember, standing up for your dignity is always worth it." Within minutes, a notification appeared. "Diana Morgan liked your post." In the end, they paid for much more than just their meal.